I'm Linda, Editorial Content Chief for American Patchwork and Quilting. In this Show Me How video, brought to you by Baby Lock, we're going to show you how to make this little market bag. It's a very sturdy bag for taking to the farmer's market or on a trip, great for holding books, whatever you need. So to get the instructions for this, go to allpeoplequilt.com/showmehowmarket and let's get started. So for the front and back of the bag body, you'll need a 15-inch by 10-inch piece of fabric. You'll need two of those, and if your fabric's directional, you want the 15 to be across and the 10 to be this way. Then you'll need two pieces for the base. Those are 5.5 by 15. Then for the lining, you'll need two 15-inch squares, and then you'll also need two 15-inch squares of lightweight fusible interfacing. And then you'll also need, for the pocket, from that same lining fabric, you'll need two 6-inch squares. For the handles, you're going to need two 4-inch by 17-inch strips of fabric. And because I wanted a little more support in my handles, I also cut interfacing that same size, and I'll fuse that to the wrong side so that I've got a little more support in those handles. So the first step is to sew that bag base, that 5.5 by 15-inch piece, to the bag body. Again, if that fabric's directional, make sure it's going the right way. You're going to sew it along the bottom edge with a 1/4-inch seam. So once you've got those two seams sewn on the front and on the back pieces, you're going to want to press that seam allowance toward the front fabric, not the bottom fabric, and then fuse your fusible interfacing to the wrong side of both the front and the back piece so that you've got a nice stable bag. Next, you're going to take your two 6-inch pocket squares and sew them together, right sides facing, 1/4-inch seam allowance, and you're going to leave about a 3-inch opening on one edge for turning. So now I've sewn all 4 sides, leaving that 3-inch opening for turning. I'm just going to clip the corners to alleviate some of the bulk, making those corners a little bit easier to have a nice clean turn. And then I'm going to turn that pocket through the opening. So now that your pocket is ready, you're going to have the opening on the bottom edge. You're going to top stitch along the 3 sides of the pocket, and I've placed it 1.5 inches up from your seam and then just equally spaced from the sides. You're going to top stitch on these 3 edges, and when you sew that top stitching on the bottom, it'll also close the opening, so you don't have to hand stitch that first. So for the handles, you're going to fold that 4-inch by 17-inch strip in half. Then you're going to fold in toward that half. So you're going to want to get that crease there just to give you a mark as to where you need to fold in. You're going to end up making a 1-inch wide, 4 layers thick by 17-inch piece for the straps. Now remember, I also added interfacing to these handles, but you wouldn't have to do that. Then you're going to top stitch along this open edge and along the folded edge just to make it look symmetrical. So I measured 3.5 inches from the left side of the bag and positioned the first end of my handle at that point. Then I put the other end of that same handle 3.5 inches from the right hand side of the bag front. I'm pinning those in place, and then I'm going to baste them in place. And I want to baste inside that 1/4-inch seam allowance so that the basting doesn't show when I sew the seam at a 1/4 inch later. So now with the handles inside, you're going to sew the front and the back together with right sides facing. You're going to sew the side seams and the bottom seam. To box the corner of a bag, you're going to line up your side seam and your bottom seam and pin those so that these seams are aligned. Next, you're going to use a ruler that's got a 45-degree mark on it. And in this case, I'm going to make a line 1.5 inches down. And you'll see I've lined that 45-degree mark up with the side fold here. I'm just going to mark across, so you're marking 1.5 inches up from the corner. It's going to be about a 3-inch line that I've marked. Then I'm going to sew on that line and then trim off the excess right here. And that's all there is to it. So for the lining, you'll take those two 15-inch squares. You're going to sew the side seam and part of the way across the bottom, leaving about a 3-inch opening for turning in the bottom, then finish up the bottom and up the other side. Then you're going to box the corners in the same way as you did for the bag. So I've turned the bag right side out. I have not turned the lining right side out. I'm just going to put the whole bag right inside the lining. Line up those side seams. Put the handles inside between the two layers and pin all the way around, and then sew all the way around. So if your machine has a free arm that you'd use for cuffs, this is a great time to use it. Basically, you're going to slip the whole bag right into that free arm and then sew all along this straight top edge. So now we're going to reach into that opening at the bottom of the lining and just wiggle the bag out and the lining inside. Now you'll stitch that bottom opening closed. Either slip stitch by hand or you can stitch it on your machine. Then tuck the lining inside the bag. Give that top edge a good pressing so that the lining stays inside the bag. And then top stitch along this top edge just to keep that lining in place. So now that top edge is top stitched, you're ready to go. I love this bag. It's got so many uses, and that pocket on the front's really going to come in handy. Again, if you need the instructions, go to allpeoplequilt.com/showmehowmarket.